Hello there. Good morning, everyone, from Tarifa, from the African Movies Festival in Tarifa. Welcome to the Tree of Words, the forum, the professional forum of this festival. Today addresses its second round table, the second reflection table, the first and only one that will be on a digital format. Today we'll be connecting to different parts of the world virtually so that we can further learn about African movie making. More specifically, our guests will be connecting from London, UK, and from the city of Lagos in Nigeria to talk to us about movie making Praxis. So now I will pass the floor to Federico Oliveira, who is the coordinator of this Tree of Words, a moderator of this seminar, so that he can introduce the different speakers. We wish you the very best for today. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Marta. Thank you to all of you who are connected. Thank you to our speakers who are here with us today, connecting from different parts of the world. I'm going to continue with this presentation of moderation in English so that I can have a more fluid conversation with our participants. The live streaming also suggests that I should use a better mic. So welcome to you all.
Thank you so much, Federico. Thank you so much, Fede, and thank you so much for the generous introduction and for inviting our team to come and share our work with the Tarifa African Film Festival, which I have to say is one of my favorite film festivals. So we wish we could be there with you in person, but we also appreciate all the hard work the festival has done to run this webinar as a hybrid multilingual event, which I think is a first for our team as well. So Fede, to answer your question, let me just share my screen now because I have a few slides to bring alive what the Screen Worlds project is and how it emerged. Okay, and let's get this up. Okay, so I hope everybody can see that now. Okay, so to answer your question, Federico, there were so many inspirations over so many years that sort of led to the conceptualization of this project, Screen Worlds, Decolonizing Film and Screen Studies. So what I just want to do here is highlight a few of those kind of moments along the way in the journey towards Screen Worlds. First of all, it would be remiss of me not to mention the importance of SOAS, University of London, which has had such a revolutionary influence on me as a film scholar. I started working there as a lecturer in African film in 2007. And then, of course, we met a few years later, Federico, when you had your time at SOAS. And I've been inspired by so many colleagues and students as well, who I've worked with at SOAS because they were really approaching film from a very culturally contextualized, embedded perspective. So I really started changing how I thought about cinema. I realized that, you know, being a world cinema expert and just handpicking films from around the world and analyzing them without knowing anything about the cultures out of which they emerged
que subyacen en lo que es la cinematografía, y muchos de esos aspectos culturales son problemáticos. Una de esas personas es Michael Thomas, a la que le di clase cuando todavía estaba estudiando. Su trabajo, el trabajo de Michael a mí me ha inspirado, porque él aprendió el idioma Amharic, que es un idioma de Etiopía, y trabajó con la gente sobre el terreno, hablando con la gente, conversando con ellos. Y eso para mí fue una fase muy importante en el desarrollo de mi trabajo. Otra cosa que quería
my last major research project, and this really ties in with your work, important work that you do at the Tarifa African Film Festival as well. And this was work over many years, research over many years, exploring the relationship between African film and film festivals. So I conducted research at festivals in Africa, in Europe, and in North America, and including at the Tarifa African Film Festival. And we, of course, collaborated on research there, Federico. And then I also used this as an opportunity to reflect on my own practices of co-founding, directing, and curating African film festivals, such as Film Africa in London. And what I found during my research is that there was really this persistent colonial attitude, particularly at some of the prestigious European film festivals, in terms of how they were treating African filmmakers, how they were curating African film, sometimes quite problematically. And so in the book, I distinguished those colonial practices from what could be called decolonial practices. So again, this was a really important influence in my thinking, my collaborations that led to the conceptualization of Screen Worlds. And just to bring this up to the present, I really wanted to highlight as well my collaborations with Estrella Sendra, someone who's Spanish, someone who I also met at SOAS and who's on our Screen Worlds advisory board. And we've been collaborating and actually creating a manifesto now called Towards Decolonized Film Festival Worlds. And we're really trying to explore the role that film festivals and film curators are taking on in terms of trying to decolonize film. And that will be out open access this year. So you'll be able to freely access it online. And just to say, we surveyed 22 film practitioners from around the world to create that research piece and manifesto, including your team at the Tarifa African Film Festival. So thank you so much for contributing to that research and sharing with us what you're doing to try to decolonize film through your film festival. But just to backtrack a little bit to the year 2015, in which my book Curating Africa in the Age of Film Festivals was published, because this is was really a key turning point for me in the development towards screen worlds, the journey towards screen worlds. As many of you may know, this was the year in which the Rhodes Must Fall movement took place at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. This was a student-led movement calling for a decolonial transformation of university spaces in South Africa, because it was 2 decades after the formal end of apartheid and very little had been transformed in terms of recruitment. You know, many professors there were still white. In terms of the university curriculum, where local African epistemologies still, you know, weren't being valued and included in syllabi and curricula. And so that was a very important movement that then started inspiring movements around the rest of the world, including at my university, SOAS, University of London. And it was actually, I first encountered this movement in a very personal way in one of my classrooms at SOAS, where I was teaching quite an Afrocentric module on African film, but I was still challenged by one of my Black students. And I'm so grateful to that student for having the courage to challenge me, because that really set me off on a path of self-critique, self-reflection, looking at my own practices, thinking about how I could further try to decolonize my teaching, you know, and my research work. And it led to wonderful collaborations with other students and also with other colleagues around SOAS, because I ended up joining the SOAS Decolonizing Working Group. And with them, we've created a decolonizing learning and teaching toolkit, which is also freely available and which gives, you know, a lot of recommendations about the kind of work that people can do to decolonize. Also, just to say, I don't have to, you know, I don't have the time to go into depth on all this thinking and reflection that happened from 2015 onwards, but I've written about this in a very personal article for the online journal PAS. So if you Google my name and PAS and the title of the article on teaching and being taught, then you can read about these reflections and my whole journey really with encountering African film for the first time and how this happened. So after that, I spent about 3 years really thinking and putting together a grant application to the European Research Council, which I submitted in 2018. We were very fortunate to get the funding. And so the Screen Worlds project launched in June 2019. Exactly 3 years ago, and it's going to run until 2024. And here is our core team. So our senior researcher, Kate Taylor-Jones, actually works with Asian filmmakers and film scholars from all over Asia. So one of the strands of our project puts African film scholars and filmmakers in conversation with Asian film scholars and filmmakers to try to compare you know, examples of what decolonizing film means in these different contexts. And then my 3 team members who are here with me today, of course, Anulika, Michael, and Nobunya, who will be speaking about the films that they're making for the project. Anna Sova, who is our creative producer for the films that we're making and is playing a very big role, particularly on the editing front with our films. And Shakira Preston, who is our project coordinator. So I think that a very important thing to realize about our project is that it's not just another academic project producing journal articles and you know, academic books, although we're doing that as well. But we're really trying to also approach the question of decolonizing film from a creative and an activist angle as well. So let me quickly just give you some examples of these, you know, more unusual things that we're doing in terms of an academic project. At the very beginning of the project, we started creating toolkits, which you can freely access on our website. And these are very much, you know, written for a general audience. And they, you know, explain where you can access more African films, because we realize that access to African films has been such a big issue and has been one of the things preventing decolonization of the film space. So please do take a look at those. Like film festivals, we've also been curating live and online events with both African and Asian filmmakers in particular, and really asking these filmmakers what decolonizing film means to them. And we record these events. So again, you can find them on our website. And then in terms of this shift from thinking about world cinema to screen worlds, getting away from homogenizing non-Western cinemas, we really are trying to encourage everyone to be very humble about what we don't know. So we have a conversational approach where we're bringing filmmakers, film scholars, film curators, film audiences from different parts of the world together to talk with one another, to try and educate one another, and correct one another's cultural blind spots, so we can all be learning together. And in decolonizing, we talk often about the unlearning process. This is an ongoing process, decolonizing. One doesn't arrive one day and say, I'm decolonized. It's through this humility, through this talking with one another, learning one another, that we feel that we will get somewhere important. And then finally, in terms of what we're presenting today, we're making films as a form of knowledge production, and this is something that is quite new in the academic space, although there've been some amazing pioneers of this form. But as you'll hear from team members today, we see a lot of possibilities in terms of doing research through filmmaking, not just through writing journal articles and books. We see collaborative possibilities, working with others. Films are co-authored, they're not solo authored. The political possibilities of thinking through the aesthetics of knowledge production through the film form, visualizing our research for wider audiences, bringing it alive on the screen and making it hopefully more accessible in this way. And then we also really hope, it's difficult to have an impact on the mainstream film industry, but we hope that we'll have some kind of impact there as well, in the sense that we are showing the rich, inspiring practices of African filmmakers who are so often marginalized or not given their due in terms of the mainstream film industry. So yeah, that's an overview of the project and what we're trying to do. And I will just stop sharing now. So thank you all so much for listening. And I should have said thank you to the audience too, both the live audience in Tarifa and the online audience. It's such an honor for us to be here today and to have this opportunity to share our work. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you so much, Lindy. It's very interesting and very inspiring to see how from some ideas and years of work, you have been able to develop a whole project with practical results and toolkits that will keep helping to decolonize teaching of films, but also filmmaking. And about filmmaking is where we want to start hearing more about your different experiences of using films in your research. And I'm going to now pass to Anulika, who I know that has been focusing her work on Nollywood, on the Nigerian film industry. She's researched one of the largest film industries in the world. And so I'm very curious, and we are all very curious to hear more about how you approach researching such a large film industry. What are the aspects and the areas that you have focused your research on? And if there is any finding, I know that you've already finished your film as part of your project, if there are any findings or any experiences that you can share with audience members of a film festival like the Fcat that can help us envision a different way of approaching our relationship to the Nigerian film industry. Thank you, Anulika. You're muted, Anulika.
Thank you so much, Fede, for that introduction. And thank you for having us on this webinar. Thanks also to your team members for the excellent work that you've put together. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. I do hope you can see that. Thank you. So the title of my talk today is the title of my documentary, which is Behind My Nollywood Screen. And I finished making this film early this year, thanks to the sponsorship on the Screen Worlds project, which is funded by the European Research Council. I should thank Lindy also for her excellent overview of the project. And I want to begin my own presentation by borrowing a line from what she just presented, which is being humble about what we don't know. I think that that's a very important consideration when we think about decolonizing film. And it's also part of what led me to make this documentary that I titled Behind My Nollywood Screen. It's a research documentary on film exhibition in Nigeria, because I think that film exhibition is the aspect of scholarship which has received the least attention, even though film exhibitors are an important part of the production and consumption circuit of filmmaking. So I decided to give them the attention that many scholars before me haven't sufficiently given them. You may probably know that Nollywood is the name given to the film industry in Nigeria. It's the largest film industry in Africa, as you rightly said. It's a homegrown industry that produces thousands of titles annually, thanks to the sheer energy and the robust practices of filmmakers in Nigeria, who also manage to attract their counterparts abroad. Nollywood has gained international recognition over the years because of its consistency in making films. And I like this very much because it's also something that led me to start studying it, because the filmmakers are seriously concerned about portraying their own lived experiences. All of the agitations, the love, the work practices, the family and communal values that they share are the things that they project in their film, which is what makes Nollywood resonate very strongly in its country of origin, and which is also what makes it attractive to various parts of Africa. So having given that little introduction to Nollywood, I'd like to tell you why I decided to make this documentary. I have three primary motivations. The first of them is that I want to reject the Western representations of Nollywood. In 2004, as well as in 2010, two different production crews from the US and from the UK arrived to Nigeria to make documentaries about Nollywood. But their representations of Nollywood was very derogatory. It was pathetic, to say the least. It was not respectful of the hard work of filmmakers. And more importantly, those crew were not humble about what they didn't know. In other words, they were not contextually aware of what they were representing. So I decided to make a documentary to correct that sort of impression, to show that there are success stories within Nollywood and that those stories need to be told as well. My second motivation is that I want to include the previously ignored sectors of the Nigerian film industry, which is partly the exhibitors. And this has to do with my own research agenda, because I came to the study of Nollywood on the platform of access, or should I say on the platform of no access. It was very difficult for me from 2009 when I started studying Nollywood, when I couldn't get access to the films that were being made and produced at the time of my study. And so when cinema companies started exhibiting Nollywood, when satellite television companies like MultiChoice started exhibiting Nollywood on TV stations, and when online platforms also started distributing Nollywood, that caught my attention. It didn't only catch my attention, it also made me appreciative of the effort of these exhibitors and how they bridged the gap for me as a researcher. The third motivation I have for making this documentary is that invitation that I had, well, from Screenboards, but also from various scholars to co-create knowledge in a consultative and collaborative way, as opposed to what the Western film crews did by creating knowledge without due consultation and without adequately collaborating with their research subjects on equal terms. Which is why, instead of bringing a Western crew this time, I sought a Nigerian who is enthusiastic about Nollywood so that he can come with me to tell the story. But first, in rejecting the Western stereotypes of Nollywood, I like to bring to your attention the comments of Charles Novia, a very important Nigerian film director who had worked with Nick Moran back in 2004 and was extremely disappointed when he saw the output of Nick Moran and BBC's work. He said, "Who the hell is Nick Moran and what gives him the right to condescendingly castigate our movie industry after spending only 3 weeks in Nigeria last November?" And so my documentary found this young man, OJ, who is not only a Nollywood enthusiast, but has now started working in film production thanks to the work that we both did on Behind My Nollywood Screen. We filmed OJ going through the exhibition companies in Nigeria, the leading ones, and interviewing the entrepreneurs or the directors of these companies, asking them questions about their vision, the government intervention in their work, the kinds of achievements they have brought about in the film industry, the challenges that they face as well in the course of their work, as well as their future for the industry, their projections for the industry. So Behind My Nollywood Screen is strictly about seeing through the eyes of OJ, who happens to be my lead character. And by the way, we filmed OJ here in this space, Glover Hall, which happened to be the first exhibition site of film in 1903. Even though this is now the refurbished version, but film was first seen in Nigeria ever in this particular space. So it was significant for us to film him here because I was also trying in my film to connect the past and the present. So in trying to be inclusive as my own way of conducting this decolonial filmmaking process, I got in touch with 4 exhibition companies and met the entrepreneurs who were behind lighting up our Nollywood screens. And I went into very many periods of conversations and interviews with them in order to produce the script that finally made the documentary. It was a lot of work trying to get their consent to film them in specific spaces and so on. But it was very interesting because we did this work together and they felt very much included in the project. So here are the 4 entrepreneurs that I interacted with and who now happen to be my research subjects and feature in my documentary. I really hope I can show that to you today, but unfortunately I can't. I'm sure that you'll get an opportunity to see my film. On my left is Joy. Joy is the CEO of Blue Pictures, and Joy brings to the exhibition space over 20 years of practice in distribution. There is also Wangi, who was the channels director of MultiChoice, the satellite television station that aired Nollywood films all over Africa for so many years. In fact, the industry owes a lot to this South African company for attracting the kind of transnational audiences that it now can boast of. There is also here, top right, Moses, who is a co-founder of the Film One Group. Moses owns and runs the leading cinema company in the country today, and they have lots of cinema theaters spread across the country, featuring Nollywood as well as Hollywood films. And on the bottom right is Afolabi, who worked in the past. He was the general manager of the first film exhibition company, West African Pictures, in Nigeria. And it was very important for me to bring their conversations together in this particular documentary to show not just how the past meets the present, but also the kinds of visions that they had at the time when they started their businesses, the journeys that they've been through, the various challenges that they have faced in lighting up the screens, big and small, for Nigerian film audiences all over the world, and the kinds of projections they have of their work 5 or 10 years from now. It was also important in co-creating knowledge, that we filmed them how they wanted to be filmed. I think that that was one of the most challenging aspects of this film, because that meant sacrificing some of my interests and privileging the preferences of these exhibitors. So yes, I already said that I had to do a lot of consultation and collaboration and making lots of choices and deciding on where to film each individual and where not to film them according to their own preferences. And that's how we came to this beautiful cinema theater. It's in this location, the National Arts Theater, which was constructed in 1977, and it happened to be the center where Nigerian films were shown back in the 1970s, which Afolabi here on my left, well, on the left of my screen, spoke about. And there is OJ interviewing him about various aspects of his work as an exhibitor back then, and him sharing lots of ideas about what it entailed and also what the film industry of today has to learn from the film industry of the past. It was a very, very insightful conversation that we had there. And here we are on the premises of MultiChoice, setting up our equipment in order to film, because Wangi, the channel's director, wanted to be filmed in specific spaces, not on the corridors, for example, not outside, but within her office. And so we spent a lot of time trying to meet her specific demands. And it was very interesting for me, but it also was a great exercise in the virtue of patience. So there is OJ again interviewing Wangi in this beautiful studio. And Wangi was very forthright in her responses about exhibition and all the challenges that they have faced, including the difficulties and the tensions between content creators and exhibitors. This is something that's not sufficiently documented in literature. But when we asked this question of Wangi, she didn't like it, but she responded to it in the way that she knew how best to. And when she told me to cut out certain scenes in the editing, we made a point to do that because, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to represent my research subjects the way they wanted to be represented without necessarily glossing over the tensions that they encounter in their work. And here I am with Joy, filming her in Blue Pictures. Well, no, this isn't us filming her, but this is part of the work that we did, receiving the footage of previously done work so that I could add it to my own documentary as well. And Joy was as gracious as ever, sharing all of her work with my team. So that's Joy's cinema floor at the entrance when we were setting up again to conduct her own interview. And here is the Film One co-founder, Moses, in his own house, which he specified that we visit so that we can film him in his own space. And again, that meant a lot to us because he opened his doors without knowing us, without having a history with us as such. He opened his doors to us to film him and talk to him about his work. So that was very important to us and it means a lot. Well, I have the slide here to show the work that I tried to do in terms of featuring the exhibitors of screen content that audiences have to consume online. It was challenging because the owners of these companies or their representatives declined the invitation to be featured in the documentary. But I realized that I couldn't complete my work without talking about online distribution, really, because this is where the world is right now, if I can put it that way. And we had to make do with what we had at the time, but it was also fun. Okay, so I'm going to finish now. I'm sure I've run out of time. So that's me and my crew after all of the work we did trying to film, but we were excited on our last day of shoot. And I would like to end with this feedback from one of my research subjects. After he saw the film, he sent me a thank you email in which he wrote, "Thank you very much for making me a part of the remarkable content you put together. I kept smiling and got a sense of fulfillment watching the very coherent narrative that I doubt has been told by any African filmmaking market. This means a lot to me, and it told me that to some extent, I achieved the work that I set out to achieve, even if I say so myself. And it was a kind of validation for me that this sort of comment came from one of those I had represented in my film, and as opposed to the one I read to you at the beginning about Nick Moran and his work and the kinds of ways that they represented Nollywood. So yes, about being humble with what we don't know and approaching our research subjects in a respectful manner doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to tell an unbalanced story. It means that we're going to tell a positive story, a decolonized story, if you like, and also a story that is truly representative of the film industry that we research and that I research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anulika. Could you please stop sharing the screen so we can go back? Thank you. Thank you, Anulika. Thank you so much for this presentation and for sharing your work with us. We really hope to watch your film to get a better sense of the final product of all these actions and research results. Now we are running a little bit late in time, and I want to jump immediately to Michael Thomas here with us, also connected from London. I know, Michael, that you've been focusing your Screen World research on the Ethiopian film industry. I know after conversations with you that you have put together, among many other research actions, an Amharic film festival retrospective in Ethiopia. So as a film festival organizer, I'm also very interested in hearing how organizing a film festival in Ethiopia has helped you research the film industry, and if you could share any reflections on what it means to decolonize by promoting filmmaking, would be super helpful. Thank you.
Great, thanks Fede for your introduction. Hi everybody out there, wherever you are. Can you see my screen? Is that all right? The Ethiopian Screen World and Cinema Addis Ababa?
Yes.
Great. All right, so I'll just try and jump into it straight away. And I'll just open by just saying I'll be talking a little bit about my making of the documentary and this film week that we did that Fede mentioned, and these kind of three key themes that run throughout these kind of ideas of conversations, creativity, and of course the cinema, like the cinema space itself. And Yuli mentioned in Nigeria, it's a very important culture going on there, and the same thing in Ethiopia, but it's quite got quite a long history and quite separate also from the Nigerian experiences. So I just firstly like to give some background to where I started off. Lindiwe kindly mentioned that she mentioned that I was an undergraduate at her class, and she's been a big inspiration and mentor in my life, and I managed to get here on this postdoc through working with her. Not only did I participate in her class, but I was also fortunate enough to be asked to be a film programmer at Film Africa 2012, looking into Ethiopian cinema, and that was my first real experience of researching archives in Ethiopia. Before, I'd been to see this film, Yanchuleba, and many other films in the cinema, just as a cinema goer like anybody else, and participated in film festivals as just a normal audience member. But this actual working for a film festival allowed me to believe that I could do something related to film. So then I managed to become an expert, this idea of an expert in cinema. I did a PhD in film in Ethiopian cinema, supervised by Lindiwe as well. And I released a book that I co-edited called Cine Ethiopia. That was the first book on the subject. But my main experience of doing all of this research is this idea of conversations and speaking to people, getting to know people, informal conversations, formal conversations as well. But also, like this volume, it was a collaboration. Three of us edited it, and we had lots of contributors. We also had interviews. So this idea of conversation runs throughout. And one of the main people who was an important research partner throughout my career, and still is Yidne Gachel Shumete, who's a filmmaker in Ethiopia. And you see me and him conversing on the left here, wearing masks during COVID time, very safe. And I first met him in 2013, also through Lindy Way. Lindy Way met him in Fespaco when he had his film playing there in, I believe, 2012 or 2013. And I helped distribute his film to festivals in the UK. And after doing this, he opened up his encyclopedic contacts, phone contacts to me, and I was able to meet many filmmakers and people involved in the film industry in Ethiopia through him. And so when I was given the opportunity to make a film, you know, this amazing opportunity for somebody who's researched film for so long, I knew that I wanted to make the film with Yidne because I'd already had this relationship. So talking to Lindy Way and having ideas and being in the development phases of creating a film, we just started all of these conversations, and it became apparent that conversations was a key theme that I wanted to also show through the film. And so we had these 5 key themes and participants that I knew that I wanted to have conversing and discussing these themes in the film itself. So this is really the research idea of the film. And so as you can see, here's one of the behind the scenes kind of shots. Yidne's got the camera, and these old actors are discussing the history, some of their historic experiences of filmmaking in Ethiopia. But how could I also try and communicate this experience of cinema going in Ethiopia? So this is now part of the creativity and the development phase. We were like, okay, I've got themes, I've got my research, I've got these conversations, but then how do I also communicate this experience of cinema going in Ethiopia, which for me was such an important part of how I also learned about cinema, how I watch films and how I contextualize my reading of films through this context-specific watching of films. So we had the idea of curating our own festival, which is called Ethiopia Film Teztaoch Kanyenyet, a retrospective on Ethiopian films. So in collaboration with Yidne and his production company Kurat Pictures and the Addis Ababa Cinema City Houses Administration Enterprise, it's quite a long word, but it's the cinema authority of the Addis Ababa government, who run the 3 biggest cinemas in the country and oldest cinemas in the country, Ambassador Theatre, Cinema Ethiopia and Cinema Empire. We managed to organize a 5-day event during the shoot period that I was out there for 30 days in March, April 2021. And we managed to curate these 5 films. And really, this was a solution to this idea of trying to communicate the experience of cinema going, but it was also the solution to an ethical problem that we had being a research film. And this idea of decolonizing film practices was how we can get the consent of many people and audience members trying to have this authentic feeling of an experience of watching cinema in Ethiopia. So we put the event on for free. It was free admission on the condition that people gave their consent, that they were okay to be in the film. And if they weren't, then we had my contact address prior to the screenings, and they could just tell us, okay, I don't want to be in a film and whatever. Luckily, we didn't have any of that, and the whole festival, despite a scare of COVID and the government nearly cancelling all events, we managed to get it off, and it was a really good success. So we managed to shoot the film and use conversations, but then we also had this idea of more creativity, and Newly said that she had a key figure, a person who was her kind of key character in the film. The audience could follow his narrative. We didn't really have that because we had these ideas, conversations, linking different parts of the film together. So instead we had a Asmari figure who you can see in white on the left, who's a musician, a local musician. And we wrote 5 original songs which bridged each section of the film together, the 5 days of the film festival, the 5 themes. And so it's also quite a musical film. And for me, that was a really important part, to try and be a little bit more creative, you know, trying to move away from this idea of research and books and texts and reading to something more, well, musical, you know, using the audiovisual elements of cinema. So in post-production, after we did the shoots, we then also did all of the recording. We continually problem solving through creative idea, through drinking coffee in cafes, and drinking and all the merriments that you can think of. But also the important thing about this idea of the continuation, we continue the conversation. So Yidne and I, we've continued to collaborate. He's now on creating other film projects, and I'm now one of his key collaborators, and he's passing me scripts. I give him feedback on scripts. And then we're also hoping to do another edition of the festival next year, when the film is completed, in which we can program a few other of the important films in Ethiopian history, and then also hopefully premiere our own film at the event. So yeah, those are just a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you, but we can also discuss some more in the conversation part. Thanks, Fedi.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your experiences, and it's very interesting that you brought up your interest and use of conversations, and I hope that in the Q&A part that we have at the end, we could talk a little bit more about how conversations can be a decolonizing tool. Now, Lindiwe, I want to jump back to you and hear more about your making of research films. I know that you've been making films with both Kenyan filmmaker Judy Kabingay and a South African producer, Bongi Weslane. Could you tell us a little bit more as well about how you're using filmmaking in your research, and what you are looking at by working with women African filmmakers?
Thanks so much, Fede. So let me share my screen again. Okay, let's get that across and up. Okay. So yes, thanks, Fede, for that question. So as part of the Screen Worlds project, I'm making several films about the inspiring work of African women filmmakers. And this really has come out of my 20 years of working in the field of African cinemas as a curator and scholar, where I've become very aware of how little attention relatively has been paid to African women as opposed to male directors. You know, all the first African filmmakers I encountered, Soliman Sisse, Ousmane Sembène, Jean-Pierre Bekolo, were all men. I love their work. But I started thinking, sort of, you know, why are we not paying as much attention to the women filmmakers? And of course, it's not just an African issue. This is a global issue to do with gender equity in the film industries and in film scholarship. And something that's come out of the Screen Worlds project is that we feel that hand in hand with decolonization of film needs to be a depatriarchalization of film as well. Now, as some of you may know, there have been some beautiful documentaries made about African male directors or film practitioners, Taha Sharia from Tunisia, Ousmane Sembène, the father of African cinema, and the film Camera d'Afrique, which is a kind of history of African cinema that really focuses exclusively on male directors. So again, I thought, you know, why are we not seeing these incredible African women filmmakers in documentaries as well? We do have some excellent scholarship on African women filmmakers. For example, the edited collection Gaze Regimes, Film and Feminisms in Africa, co-edited by Jyoti Mistry and Antje Schumann. And actually our team member Nabunya Levine has a beautiful chapter in this book, which is a complementary piece to the film she made about Sarah Baartman. More recently, we have Lizelle Bischoff and Stephanie van der Peer's book, Women in African Cinema, which was published in 2020. And then we have the ongoing work of Betty Ellison, who is both a scholar, but who's also kept up a very informative and very important blog for many years, covering the work of African women filmmakers. And she also made a film in 2002 about women directors around the African continent, interviewing lots of African women filmmakers. But of course, that's 20 years ago now, and a lot has happened in the film space in the last 20 years in terms of what women have been doing. So I wanted to address this. But again, in terms of doing this research, not just through writing journal articles, but through making films, I was inspired by what Lugone says in the article Toward a Decolonial Feminism, where she says, feminism does not just provide an account of the oppression of women, it goes beyond oppression by providing materials that enable women to understand their situation without succumbing to it. I've also been inspired by the work of the Gina Davis Institute, which is trying to bring about better gender equity, and their motto, if she can see it, she can be it. So coming to my films, right now I'm deep in the post-production phase, the editing phase of 2 Screen Worlds films that I am making about incredible African women filmmakers. One of them is Bongi Weslane, who is a South African film producer. She was the first recipient of the Female-Only Filmmakers Slate funding from the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa, which saw 26 short films made by female teams come to fruition. She runs the production house Blingola Media, through which she's also making popular commercial films like Happiness is a 4-Letter Word and Happiness Ever After. And she also co-founded the Creative Producers Indaba to really build the knowledge and capacity of film producers around the African continent. And what I've been particularly interested in the film I'm making about her work, and this is just the working title here, From Woman to Woman, the Screen Worlds of Bongi Weslane and Dineo Lusenga. So that might change. But I'm really focusing on the work Bongi has been doing as a mentor to younger female South African filmmakers, and particularly focusing on her relationship with Dineo Lusenga, who is an emerging film producer, currently producing her first feature-length fiction film, which is an adaptation of the novel Coconut by the South African female writer Kopano Matlwa. And Bongi is doing this incredible work, supporting and mentoring Dineo in that process. So the film is a kind of portrait of their work, their collaborations, their relationship, and which I hope when it's made will inspire other established filmmakers around the world to play the kind of caring intergenerational role that Bongi is playing in the South African film space. The other incredible woman about whom I'm making a film is Judy Kabingay, a much acclaimed Kenyan filmmaker, and also the executive founder and creative director of the organization DocuBox, which began 10 years ago and has been the source of a tremendous wave of creative documentary and fiction filmmaking by East African filmmakers. And I first met in 2009 at the FESPACO Film Festival in Burkina Faso, and we became very good friends. So I've known her for 13 years now. I've also been watching and curating her films, having long conversations with her, staying with her when I go to Nairobi. So really the process of making this film with Judy and about Judy is an example of what Bischoff and Van der Peer say are films that emerge out of female affinities and affiliations in their many manifestations, female friendships, communities, activism, movements, alliances, and transnational connections. Because this film wouldn't have been possible to make in the way that we've made it without my long friendship with Judy, and without the incredible community that DocuBox has created in Nairobi and across East Africa in terms of a very rich film culture, a beautiful way that filmmakers are working with one another, collaborating with one another. So I feel very fortunate to have as my cinematographers for the film Maya Leko and Chris King, who were amongst the first DocuBox grantees and who've made a beautiful documentary called The Letter for DocuBox. And they've brought on other Kenyan cinematographers and a Kenyan production coordinator for our project. And we shot the majority of the film in February. It was really exciting, huge collaborative effort, lots of hard work from all of us. And again, just to say what, I feel made the process decolonial was that, it just wouldn't have worked to have brought in a crew who didn't know Judy, who didn't know the DocuBox staff, who hadn't worked closely with the DocuBox staff. So it had a quite, intimate feel on the set. The process of making the film about Bongi was more difficult because we had to film that during COVID, and I couldn't travel to South Africa from the UK at the time. So I had to kind of direct through Zoom. But again, what really worked well in that on that project is that I asked Bongi who she wanted to film her, who she wanted the cinematographer to be, and she chose a South African female filmmaker who she works very closely with, called Samantha Nell. So I think that really helped in the process, because again, there was a feeling of comfort and intimacy on set where I could relax because she knew Samantha well. And so for both films, you know, my crew has been largely female-led as well, I should say. And so finally, just then again, in terms of how Bongi and Judy themselves have been engaging in decolonial feminist praxis in their work, I focus on how generous Judy has been in setting aside her own filmmaking work to found and run DocuBox, to really support the filmmaking work of others, to mentor a younger generation of East African filmmakers. And these are actually both women and men. So these are some of the filmmakers who are doing incredible work in East Africa right now, who are working with DocuBox, being supported by DocuBox, and who I have interviewed for the film. So again, I chose to focus on these two women, not just because I love their film work and I think because I find them amazing filmmakers. I chose them because of their leadership style, because of their generous, the generous role they are playing in mentoring and enabling other filmmakers. So thank you all so much to you for listening, and hopefully I'll be able to share the films with you soon.
Yes, so thank you so much, Lindy, for this. Very interesting, and hopefully we can see the films soon too. I'm going to now jump, just to keep track of time, to my last question to Nobunye. I know, Nobunye, that your work has been focusing more on the philosophical aspects of reflecting on the concept of decolonizing screen worlds. And I would like to take also this opportunity to acknowledge a question that we have received from one of the participants on this webinar from South Africa, who is actually wondering how is decolonization defined by screen world projects. So I hope that maybe this presentation will also shed light on this question that we have received from an audience member. Thank you. Can we hear Nobunye? I think it's muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, Fede. I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question, but we can get to that later on when we have more of a conversation and a Q&A.
Okay.
And I think, the question that was asked by the participant on the webinar, because I'm going to speak specifically to what I've been doing with respect to the project. And I think it's important to note as well that I joined the project later than the other team members, so I'm actually not in production on my film yet. And what I'll be presenting today are actually a set of incomplete notes concerning a decolonial filmmaking praxis, so it's not cohesive. And I don't think it should be, because that would be politically problematic. In other words, it's not singular. And rather is something that's about my own interpretation around certain gestures towards decolonizing screen worlds, and certain thoughts that have animated and are animating my thinking around decolonial filmmaking praxis. And I'm going to be looking at notions of the fragment and enunciation, freedom dreams, reverie, and the idea of poetic knowledge. So what I'm about to say is a series of moves, glimmers, possibilities, tactics, not strategies. So I'm using the word tactics in the Michel de Certeau sense. So what I mean by that is that moves that have no proper place and must seize on the wing the possibilities that offer themselves at any given moment. So these are disjointed moments of forceful ephemera that are intended to arouse thinking rather than to perform a cohesive talk. I realized recently that a lot of my films are preoccupied with rooms. the physical space of rooms, the frame as a room, and the interior lives or subjectivity of women, exploring and privileging the interiority of women as complex rooms that are articulated cinematically in the space of rooms, where the room is at once both the physical and subjective space, which speaks to how these various notions of the room function in an interwoven manner in my films. So here we see how working within the room as a constraint that was mostly born out of budgetary constraints, is politically and aesthetically generative. In working with the room as a constraint, where women express and cultivate their subjectivity, direct the look and set it, there's often an aesthetic preoccupation with tableau and the still moving image, which is a Tina Campt concept. Still moving image, or the still moving image, are images that hover between still and moving images. You see it here, and here, and here, and here. These are stills from a film on Sarah Baartman, a South African historical figure. The film privileges an imagining of her experiential, so that she tells us what she thought and felt, so that we see how she related and who she loved. And in this slide, and this next one, two other women in rooms. These are stills from Spillover, a fragmentary cinepoem of feminist love praxis, where the film fragment, following the decolonial thinker Walter Mignolo, is enunciation, offering a world that is constantly invented. The film fragment is mobile, responsive, malleable, and mutable. So the reason I'm so invested in thinking through the film fragment as opposed to representation in terms of film is that representation assumes that there is a world out there that someone is representing outside of the speaking subject. So representation assumes a particular mastery, or that you can master a particular aspect of the world. Whereas what I would like to emphasize is there isn't a world that is represented. Rather, it is constantly invented in the enunciation, in the speaking subject. The enunciation is the fragment at rest, but never finished. And when I think of the film fragment, which, as I said, I think of as enunciation, as something that speaks, but does not seek to represent in this kind of master narrative sense, the film fragment is an option or strategy enacted and framed in other options in a relation of decolonial love. Back to the two women in rooms from Spillover. In this slide, in the bar, the notion of a woman's gaze is materialized in the room of the frame while refusing our gaze on her. In this next slide, the woman at the window, here's a fragment of the premise. A woman lives in an apartment in Johannesburg, a window to look out from where I see something. She sends her lover letters detailing reflections and observations made on her daily walks. Her musings turn into reflections on promise-keeping and love. Walking and letter writing are generative sites. They are erotic sites of reflection and realization. The ecstasy of reflection and realization, of coming to understand something or oneself, to know something. And in this next slide, a woman creates a room for herself. She makes a poem of herself for herself to feel herself. A self-created aesthetic of existence that expresses an everyday technique of self-love. And finally, some notes on dreaming. When thinking through a decolonial filmmaking praxis, one constantly wrestles with despair and limits. This got me thinking about dreaming, not in some flippant sense, but as serious work, serious, ecstatic, playful, imaginative, and utopian work. I've been thinking about the concept of reverie and its link to freedom dreams. I derived the notion of a freedom dream from Robin D.G. Kelley. He says, a freedom dream exalts many things at once. As Kelley tells us, the energies of love and imagination as powerful social forces, the merits and power of visions of freedom, the poetry that dreams of a new world. In both mine and Kelley's conception, freedom dreams are a kind of utopian thinking. When I conceive of utopian thinking, I lean into what is expressed by Françoise Verge in her book, A Decolonial Feminism. Verge tells us, 30 of us artists and activists wrote, we want to implement utopian thinking, intended as an uplifting energy and force, as a presence and as an invitation to emancipatory dreams, and as a gesture of rupture, to dare to think beyond that which is presented as natural, pragmatic, or reasonable. We do not want to construct a utopian community, but to return all of its creative force to dreams of defiance and resistance, justice and freedom, happiness and kindness, friendship and wonder. So I'm thinking about how freedom dreams might apply to the idea of reverie as a world-making concept, but also how that might apply to film, which of course is a world-making thing in and of itself. And all of this is to actualize a move out of the feeling of despair, to get us closer to possibility. And just to clarify, I think I'm using the word reverie as opposed to just dreaming to signal that it's something that exists at the site of what Chela Sandoval calls differential consciousness. So you're neither asleep nor awake. It's a third space. I'm currently working on a piece, which is one of my Screen World's deliverables, called Reverie, in collaboration with my dear friend and fellow filmmaker, Palisa Shongwe, who you saw in the earlier stills, such as the film on Sarah Baartman, but also the still with the woman lying in the pool, where we think through the notion of freedom dreams and reverie. The piece, called Reverie, lies at the nexus of the essay film, videographic criticism, and found footage film. It is assembled from pieces, film fragments, fragments of text and conversation, and film outtakes to reveal a feminist love praxis in the collaborative life of two makers, Nobunye Levine and Palisa Shongwe. It is a work of ephemeral impressions organized through the logic and action of reverie, where echo and resonance are considered. In reverie, freedom and pleasure are imagined through the aesthetic and form of states of reverie, where the haptic is also conjured as a further site of freedom and pleasure. Reverie is a relational reverie, where a series of women dream of one another in call and response, a freedom dream tracing the reverberations of various freedom dreams in the audiovisual bonds between the different pieces. In this slide, you see a still from Reverie. And in this next slide, another still from the piece. And now a final thought, and I will now conclude my presentation. The decolonial thinker Emi Cesar wrote, "Poetic knowledge is born in the great silence of scientific knowledge. What presides over the poem," he writes, "is experience as a whole." This reminds me of Audre Lorde's insistence that poetry is not a luxury. Here's what I think when I reflect on the work that Palisa and I are doing in thinking through the idea of reverie and making this piece that we're calling Reverie. Cinema is a site-specific enunciation of poetic knowledge, where freedom dreams can be expressed in all the mirrored and borderless ways of dreaming, and where collective dreaming ruptures the capitalist, racist, and heteropatriarchal dream machine of the Hollywood industrial mode. So these are just some of my thoughts that have been animating my thinking around decolonial filmmaking praxis, and more broadly, moves or glimmers, as I mentioned before, tactics towards decolonizing screen worlds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bongi, and thank you for concluding this great overview of your different projects with also some explanations on how images and aesthetics can also be a space of decolonizing. We have been receiving a few questions, and I want to acknowledge the little time that we have left, unfortunately, a bit less than 15 minutes. As I mentioned before, I want to acknowledge one of the questions that came through from South Africa. I'm trying to retrieve it at the moment in this different, from South Africa, Nisha Naido has been asking, and she's wondering how Screen World has a project and has an academic initiative defines decolonization. I think it would be very interesting to hear very briefly an answer for all of our followers, and we are going to continue receiving more questions from the audience.
Should I start, Fede? So
Thank you,
thanks, Nisha, for those questions. So I hope our presentations have given some sense of how we are working with this concept and trying to think through it. But I'd just like to emphasize that this is an ongoing and collaborative process, very much about listening to and working with others from our own positionalities, lived experiences, to think about what those terms mean in particular contexts, because we feel that's the only way also to get away from the ways this term has also been appropriated and become a kind of buzzword, as is often said. You know, it has become a buzzword, it's being appropriated, used in lots of different ways. And we've seen that actually through calls we've put out where we've had submissions for things which are taking this term and just defining it as anything and everything, which is obviously very problematic. So I can't go into this, I don't have the time to go into this in depth now, and I don't want to take up the space, but just to direct everybody to our website, where we have a lot of different materials, and especially the conversations we are having with different African and Asian filmmakers, asking them what decolonizing film means to them. So I'd like to invite my other team members to also contribute to this if they would like to.
Thank you, Lindiwe. Unless, Anjolika, would you like to add something? Just to jump before.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I already attempted to give some answers to that question in the chat box. So please have a look. I would not want to read it because of time, but I want to refer to the Screen Worlds event we had in January. It was with 3 Nigerian filmmakers, and we asked them what decolonizing meant to them. They are practicing filmmakers in Nigeria, very well known, highly established, and they unanimously said that for them, decolonizing is telling African stories that have their DNA in those stories. Now, however you understand that is fine. I just want to summarize by saying that decolonization means a lot of things to different people, and that you must include positionality in any attempt to talk about decolonization. Otherwise, we just might, get into this loggerheads of trying to understand what it is if we don't take cognizance of one's positionality. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjolika, for adding that. I would like to also acknowledge another question that has come from Nigeria, from Elizabeth Olajiwola, who says, seeing that these films are part of knowledge production, what is your release strategy?
Can I invite you, Anjuli, to speak about that, because you've, having completed your film, you've got the best release strategy of all of us so far.
Oh, you're muted.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for that question, and thank you, Fede, for echoing it. So we have various strategies. For me, well, for all of us, we have made research films. So of course, our first targets, if I may say that, would be research communities, academic communities. But of course, we're also not ruling out the fact that we want to show it to various people all over the world. I just want to say that our films will inevitably end up on our website, screenworlds.com, when we've gone through festivals and conferences and academic communities. Next month, June, there is a conference that's hosted by the Lagos Studies Association, and all the attendees of that conference will have an opportunity to watch Behind My Nollywood Screen. So watch out for it. I'll just pop my email there, so if you want to know more about it, I'll be very happy to let you know. And of course, we'll be announcing these things on our website and on our social media handles, so please stay tuned.
Thank you, Anjulika. I want to use these extra minutes to remind everyone that if you also have more questions, we have the chat box for those of us connected via Zoom. Also on YouTube and Facebook Live, we can receive questions and I can read them to the panelists. I want to acknowledge also questions that we are answering online from the Spanish Cultural Centers in Equatorial Guinea, and to those that have been chatting directly with the panelists like Marta Lima and Ana Martinez from Spain. So thank you for being connected. Because we are a film festival, I have a question that I'm very interested in posing to you. Lindy, you've been mentioning at the beginning that you've been working on a film festival as Decolonizing Spaces. If you can summarize it in a nutshell, what do you think is the role of film festivals to decolonize our culture and film festival like ours?
Thank you for that huge question, Fede. And again, I would just recommend, because I won't be able to go into much depth here, but that chapter that Estrella and I have co-written will be out soon and goes into depth and again foregrounds the voices of these many film practitioners around the world about what they are doing. But again, like Anjuli was saying, positionality and lived experience is absolutely crucial to us in defining decolonizing. So this means being willing to be self-critical. There's a lot of, I think it is a big problem when there's arrogance, when there's not that humility for whatever organization to turn around and look at themselves and think about how they can be better, and to be open to feedback like that. So I think every film festival, needs to be open to that kind of feedback. And to what Estrella and I really looked at is, again, festivals being rooted in their own particular spaces and working out very clearly with local stakeholders what decolonizing means in that particular community, and to make sure that they are respecting that. So we give examples of how festivals in Brazil, in different festivals in Europe, in Australia, and in Africa are really trying to do that. So it's not one size fits all kind of model. It's a process. Again, you've heard the word consultation a lot, being consultative, speaking with others, being people oriented. This is not just about representation and changing the films that we see on our screens. It's fundamentally about how we all relate to one another. It's the how and not just the what. Just by having more African films on screens or more African films on syllabi, but not changing the other dynamics of processes and people involved is not going to go very far. So I hope that gives a little bit of a sense of the kinds of issues we delve into.
Yeah, no, that I know that. Oh, sorry, Nambunya, thank you.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to say very briefly as well to add that I also think knowledge production is critical to decolonial work, because as we all know, decolonization you know, as a historical process, was obviously about, you know, the decolonization of peoples in terms of forced removals, appropriation of land, and all these factors. But it was also about denials of subjectivity, of histories, of ways of producing knowledge, and senses of self. So I just wanted to also re-emphasize, because sorry, I didn't see the conversation earlier. I've just now looked through some of the conversation earlier, that the exchange between Nisha and Anuli, and I think you know, this it needs to be a longer conversation. Firstly, so I'm trying to be very kind of like brief around what I'm saying, but I think that part of what we're doing is also thinking through knowledge production, actually, and how that's intrinsically linked to subjectivity, which is why I also spoke so much about subjectivity in terms of the work that I'm thinking through Black women's subjectivity, specifically, as you saw in all the images that you were seeing, Black African women. And Lindiwe also obviously highlighted that in her work. So I just wanted to re-emphasize that in a very inelegant way, because I feel now I need to be very quick, that really what's also critical is about is actually, you know, decolonization is about undoing different knowledge paradigms, which essentially denied people's existence. And part of that is about interrogations of subjectivity and the ability to create one's subjectivity on their own terms. And obviously the way that we are thinking about that is through film, because that's our medium. So I'll just stop there, but yeah, that needs a lot of unpacking.
Thank you, Nubunya. And this leads us to the point that we would love to continue this conversation. So hopefully next year we can continue in person after this webinar or seminar in person. And that's why a film festival is good to continue this type of conversations. But I don't want to finish this webinar by not also acknowledging an important point that you've all raised in your different research. Michael has been focusing on it in his work, which is the idea of conversation, because I think it's central to how we can approach and use it as a method, I guess, to decolonize the work we do and the way we represent other cultures. And I say represent from the point of view of a film festival organizer. So I would like to truly, maybe Michael, if you can go in depth on explaining how conversation is key in this process of decolonizing our knowledge, decolonizing our screens, because I saw also in Nobunyan's presentation that in those images there is a different ways of presenting a conversation with the audience. So I think it's key to understand why conversation is so central.
Yeah, so for me also, you know, coming from my background and my context, obviously born and bred in London, and for me it's about listening as much as anything else, the conversation. It's about meaningful listening as well, right? So it's about actually listening and then taking on whatever you've heard, whatever you've learned, moving forward in the discussion, which is always going to be ongoing for me as well. So if you make a film may be an end product to conversation that you've had with different people, and you collaborate with research partners, for example, of my film in Ethiopia, and participants who give their time freely. So you have to represent them in a way that it stays true to the conversation that they are having and that you are having with them as well. And so there's all of these ethical things that you have to always have at the foreground of your dealings, I think. And so one of the ways also of continuing the conversation is like through these festivals, through having conversations and workshops and giving back, and always being available to, for example, research participants, people who have contributed to your work. They've given their time and energies And that's what I value. And if I can give something like that back to people, then I think that's what conversations really are. It's give and take, and it's learning from each other. I don't know, that's quite a vague, broad definition of it. I think, yeah, in Nobunye's work, she has these really deep and personal conversations with specific people who feature in her films. But I think, yeah, maybe Nobunye can also, if she wants to add to that idea of conversation in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, there's a lot to say about that, but I think it's obviously evident in some of the examples. So Palisa, who I'm making this current piece with, she's also in a lot of my films. And in terms of, for instance, Spillover, which I showed you some stills from, that film was partly produced through a conversational praxis, you know, that was about literally being in conversation with the various people who perform in the film, who are not performing themselves. But some of those conversations animated a number of different moments and concepts that I was thinking through in terms of the film. And there's obviously, you know, the conversation that's very directly also occurring between Palisa and I in the sense that we're making this current piece together. So it's being produced through a collaborative praxis that also brings our different films into conversation with each other. So in some of the stills you saw her film Unomalanga and the Witch, and overlaid with images from the Sarah Bartman film. And yeah, that I would say, just kind of in a very offhand way, these are some of the ways that conversation features in my work. But I also think that filmmaking is a conversation in and of itself, obviously, with the world, with every kind of, that's why I keep on emphasizing this notion of utterance as opposed to representation, which is really important to how we reconfigure the power relations around how film works within the film industry itself, which is why I also wanted to really kind of think about, you know, all, you know, the idea of dreams and how Hollywood film creates actually dreams, which create universes of ourselves in very particular ways, like how we perform ourselves, and really wanted to disrupt that in terms of, you know, this kind of thinking that a political work that I'm doing around dreams, which is why I mentioned it's serious work, but it's also poetic. Poetic work is serious work. Audre Lorde, poetry is not a luxury. I will end there.
Thank you, Nobunye. Thank you, everyone. I feel that this conversation now has got into the bubbly part that we have to cut, unfortunately. I wish we could continue with our festival audience here in the streets of Tarifa after the screenings in the different venues. But hopefully next year we can also see your films here. So that would continue this important conversation. I really want to thank you all for being connected. Thank you, Lindiwe, Anulika, Nobunye, and Michael, for offering your time and for sharing your important work that you do at Screen Worlds. Congratulations for it. And we will stay in touch. I just want to allow Lindiwe to say a last few words to make everyone understand how they can find more information on Screen Worlds and continue learning from you.
Thank you so much, Fede. Thank you so much to you and your team again, and to everyone who's taken the time to come and listen to us today. So please keep in touch with us through our website, www.screenworlds.org. And you can find all our contact details there, and you can sign up to our newsletter and access all our free resources. Everything we're doing as part of this project will be going up, freely available on the website. So yes, do get in touch with us. And some of us have also put our personal emails in the into the chat box as well for Zoom.
Recording stopped.
Okay, thank you all so much. And now we have to disconnect. I want to thank again all of our team, Curro, Jose, our translator here, and everyone else. El Árbol de las Palabras, the Palabra Tree, continues tomorrow with more roundtables and a masterclass with Lemoang Jeremiah Mosese, who is here with us in Tarifa. So stay tuned, and thank you all again, and see you at the FCAT. Bye-bye.